Dolly and Julie. I mean, this is dream. I was saying to the two of them before, amazing that we get to have you in conversation tonight. Because it's already so late on the East Coast, we're gonna move into this pretty quickly. I also want to say, usually kind of toward the end of the introductions, we go around and people share and answer a short answer to a question. And this is a wonderful way of letting our speakers know who is in the room, the real room, the virtual room. I'm going to give you the question now, and we're going to invite everybody to answer in chat while I do a few words of, introduction and reflection. But so we're going to go with and ask you to answer this in just in the chat. But what's the one word you associate with confronting your own biases? What's the one word you associate with confronting your own biases? So I'm going to invite you to answer that. Those of you who, for whom that sound is familiar, are probably saying, "Oh, she's got low blood glucose." But I have already tried to correct my low blood glucose 15 minutes ago, and so we're going to see how that goes. But if you're worried about me, and also, like, I know, I feel like a lot of you tell me every day in different ways how much you care about me and making sure that I'm okay. I just want you to know, specifically on the low blood glucose, we've already treated it, and Johnny's already been here, and he's on with us, but I've tried to treat that. So you don't have to worry about whether or not I know that my blood glucose is low. So, all right. So officially, welcome everyone to CPS Lectures number 140, Dolly Chugh on the person that you want to be. So throughout our daily lives, we all encounter bias in one way or another, from gender and racial biases to religious intolerance. It can be really hard to tackle these uncomfortable issues. And luckily, Dolly Chugh knows how to help people move through the fear and discomfort that comes with fighting inequality and oppression. Dolly is a powerhouse. She attended Cornell University, got her MBA from Harvard Business School, along with a PhD in organizational behavior, also from Harvard. And since then, she's been a professor at the NYU Stern School of Business and has centered her social psychology research around unconscious bias. Dolly's been named one of the top 100 most influential people in business ethics by Ethisphere magazine, along with individuals like Bill Gates and Pope Francis. She's also been recognized for her excellent, extraordinary teaching skills in subjects of leadership, management, negotiations. Recently, she got the 2020 NYU Distinguished Teaching Award. And today we'll hear about how Dolly's first book, The Person You Mean to Be, How Good People Fight Bias, which has been featured in the 25 most popular TED Talks of 2018. We're going to hear more about this book. Her book is an inspiring guide on how to confront bias and stand up for what you believe in. Being on the right side of history is not a matter of simply being a good person, she says, but rather pushing yourself to constantly become a better person. As an attendee of this CPS Lectures, and you also have the opportunity to get a signed copy of Dolly's book. So if you don't already have one, I know that you know that CPS Lectures will ask you to buy copies for yourselves. If you're able to, copies as gifts. We had an extraordinary book club for the school of both of our daughters, Coco and Lola, we had an extraordinary book club experience meeting here. So we also will go out of our way to say, please try, if you're in one or multiple, as many of you are, book clubs, use this as the book that you'll talk about in 2021, if it hasn't happened already. It was an extraordinary conversation. But again, if you don't already have a copy of The Person You Mean to Be, if you do, please send a copy of the photo of cps@diatribe.org. And then at the end of the lecture, we're going to pick one lucky winner. Dolly is going to send a signed copy to your home. And again, we are just so moved that she is here. Thank you so much to her for being here. Thank you so much to Julie for being here. Tonight, Julie is joined by New York Times bestselling author, CPSLecture alum, Julie Lythcott-Haims. Julie has joined us in 2015 for the 95th CPSLecture on how to raise an adult. And again, in 2018 for the 117th CPSLecture on Real American. Julie also has a book coming out in February. And Julie, can you hold it up, please? This is extraordinary. This is specifically aimed at 18 to 34-year-olds. And so probably almost everybody here is in that age group or is, helping look after in one way or the other, someone in that age group. But this is amazing. Her third book, also Master of Negotiation, because she made it possible to have Real American be in the middle of those two books being published. And Real American also, if you haven't read it, her extraordinary memoir. Growing up in the Midwest, a middle-class household, the child of a white parent, a Black parent. Julie Lythcott-Haims believes in humans. She's deeply interested in what gets in our way, and reading Real American was all about reading, about conversations that you might or might not think could never happen, depending on the vantage point that you're coming from. But again, New York Times bestselling author of the Anti-Helicopter Parenting Manifesto, How to Raise an Adult. Her TED Talk on this subject has more than 5 million views. Not 500,000, 5 million. And in 2020, she became a regular contributor with CBS This Morning on parenting. So again, Real American, critically acclaimed prose and poetry memoir. And again, Your Turn, How to Be an Adult, will be out in April 2021. And please pre-order it because that's how we behave here. Please pre-order it if you can. Please pre-order multiple copies if you can. And thank you to Julie being right in the middle of bringing that book into the world. How amazing for her to be here tonight with Dolly, and how thrilled she was when we asked her also. So that was really cool. This is the 140th CPSLecture, and we're just really thrilled to hear from them both and to learn how to answer the questions. Am I doing the right thing? Am I saying something wrong? And we urge you all to challenge yourselves to self-reflect and embrace the change that comes with it, personal growth and hope for the future. As many of you know, the series serves to honor the memory of my dad, Cyril Patrick Shaughnessy. He died back in 2002. And so really these, and thank you so much for everyone coming. The gatherings that we do are really a tribute to his memory, and also have really been a way for our little family to spread his passion for sharing conversation and sharing knowledge. And this is so much amazing learning. The series is really close to my heart, and I'm so grateful to all of you for joining us here tonight, and for those of you who have been here a bunch of times previously. So CPS Lectures is a program of the diaTribe Foundation. That's a nonprofit that we established 7 years ago to help people with diabetes and people with pre-diabetes, and to advocate for action. And so we've grown from 6,000 subscribers to a weekly newsletter that we have to almost 250,000. And we're on a roll. We raised 3.2 million last year, and that was up from just 80,000 during our first year. And we are trying to break last year's record. So I just want to say we're also looking for 227 donors. And so even if you could give just literally $2, $3, $5, no gift is too large, but it means a lot that we can increase our grassroots donors. So that's diaTribe.org. Everybody here knows who's been to even one of these lectures that I'm so fortunate. I have such an amazing team at diaTribe. We couldn't have done it without everyone's support, especially Katie Brower, CPS Lectures extraordinaire, just manager extraordinaire and organizer. So if you have ideas for people you would like to see, you know where to go. You know why we're here tonight. And I know all of you are really, really excited to get going. Thank you so much for all of the different pieces that each of you has brought in different ways to diaTribe. Just being here tonight means so much to us. So, before we begin, again, if you haven't written in the virtual room, if you haven't answered yet the question, what is one word you associate with confronting your own biases, please do that. I want to tell you, we had some less intense and easier questions, and in our talk today, we're like, no, this is what the question is going to be, and I'm just looking at some of those answers, and you can tell this is going to be vivid. This is going to be a fascinating evening, and maybe a hard evening for some of us. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for again, coming, Dolly, Julie, Wanda, thank you for introducing me to Dolly. It has really been life-changing to read her book and to share it with so many people. Hand it off to the two of you.
Kelly, thank you so much for being you. I think I speak for everybody on this call in saying thank you for being you. As I think you know, I also walk this earth as the daughter of a child of a father who has passed away. And the way in which you honor Cyril Patrick Shaughnessy Jr. with this lecture series is such a lesson to us all, such a gift to your father. And please know that he adores you and is proud of you and is just continually awed by who you are on this planet. I want to thank you, Kelly, and Katie, and the whole team who put this amazing lecture series, CPS Lectures, together, and the diaTribe folks more broadly. It is truly an honor to get to be here with Dolly Chugh. Her amazing book, The Person You Mean to Be, is an essential read for our time. It was written before our time. It was written as our time was becoming itself. That is, Dolly had the sense that some stuff was about to go down, and Dolly was right. And many of us had the sense. Some of us are just waking up to it now, and that's fine. But Dolly knew, and you can tell that with the thoughtful way in which she's constructed this book, and how it really holds our hand in this very challenging American moment that demands that we not sit on the sidelines if we have been sitting on the sidelines. So I'm going to ask some questions of Dolly, and then we're going to get to your questions in the chat, and then we'll be done. We are going to try to end on time, which is at 6:30 Pacific, because Dolly is back east and Dolly needs to get to bed. So we're just going to try to keep this snappy. Okay. Are you all in this? You ready? Okay. So toward the end of the book, Dolly quotes Joe McNeil, who was one of the 4 college students who integrated the lunch counter at Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. And she quotes Joe today in the modern era, quite recently, as having said, "The stuff of being a good person is hard." So here we have the permission from a guy who integrated a lunch counter back in the 60s, late 50s even, I think it was, telling us now that the stuff of being a good person is hard. So let us take a deep breath and not expect that we're supposed to be perfect at this. And let us be curious about what comes up for us in this conversation. Notice where your own buttons may be getting pushed. Notice how your body responds to something Dolly says, or I say, or one of the other participants says. Those are clues from your body, from your spirit, that you are feeling something, and take notice of that, because that could form a great conversation. It might be worth your following up upon tomorrow, into the week. Something's coming up for you, that matters. Take note. So Dolly, my first question for you is, within this context of the stuff of being a good person is hard, can you just summarize for us, in our efforts to be with one another as humans, we nevertheless manage to be biased. We otherize one another. We put each other in categories sometimes, or treat others like objects instead of like people. You're urging us to notice that and to move from being good to goodish, fixed mindset to growth mindset, from being believers and doing the right thing to builders of a better community and society. There's this tremendous sort of velocity, the sense of movement to your advice. We need to go from this to this. So I'm asking for an answer that kind of shapes that for our listeners.
Yeah, wow. Julie, selfishly, I just want to hear you talk more. Is that wrong? Like, I just want to be, well, what do you think, Julie? And let, soak up more of what you're sharing. This is so powerful. Thank you. Thank you for moderating this conversation, and Kelly for inviting me, and Katie for guiding us through. The velocity you're describing is my desire to create velocity in myself. What I'm offering in the book through the tools of being a social scientist is exactly the journey I'm trying to be on myself. It's exactly the mishaps and mistakes that I notice in how I categorize people, how I assume. I've seen a couple of people here in the crowd who I haven't seen in a long time because we went to business school together. I remember being at my 25th business school reunion and seeing a Black person older than me, so would be from an older class, I think, and assuming they were there staffing the reunion, not there as an alumnus. I hate that is one of my most salient memories of my business school reunion, is that mistake that I made in that moment, that split second of assumption. And so the journey, the velocity for me that I try to capture in the book, offering stories and science as a guide, both as guides, is to capture when we attach ourselves to this idea of being a good good person. And the research says most of us do, like not just the people on this Zoom, but like white nationalists are quite confident that they're good people. Most of us view ourselves as a good person. Most of us consider that identity to be central to who we are. That identity, I argue, is getting in the way of us actually being better people, because we become very invested. I know I feel myself. I loved how you said, like, let's pay attention to what's going on in our body. I feel myself kind of like doubling down on wanting to be seen as good and seeing myself as good. And when I feel myself doing that, I can't let in new information. What I've been trying to nudge myself towards for the last 20 years is this idea of being a goodish person, embracing Carol Dweck, who many of you may know her or her work as psychologist at Stanford, her research on growth mindset. The idea of being a goodish person is that I'm always getting better at this job of being egalitarian, that I'm never quite going to get there, but I'm always going to be better. And what that means is that I am looking for the mistakes. I want to find them. It's an Easter egg hunt. I know they're there. The more I can find, the better I'm going to get. And so that's the work of going from being a believer to a builder, going from being good to goodish that you described. That's the velocity, and it's hard. It can be hard, and we see it in the one words that popcorned out in our chat box, that sometimes we feel ourselves in that space of embarrassment or dread, and sometimes we feel ourselves in that space of growth and curiosity and necessity, and that's the journey.
Thank you. There are a lot of folks who believe that America is a meritocracy, that everybody has access to the, boundless opportunity here. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you're not making it, it's your own fault. That tends to be the dominant narrative or explanation of those who say, I don't have to pay attention to race. Race isn't an issue. I'm colorblind. Why are you all talking about this?
Yeah.
And I think you do a great job on these pages of speaking to the myth of the meritocracy belief and the bootstrap narrative. And one of the great metaphors you use, and I think it's not yours, I think you say it comes from Debbie Irving from Waking Up White. It's the notion of the tailwind and the headwind. In order for people to appreciate that, no, what you think of as a meritocracy where everybody can just, succeed if they try hard enough, is actually a system dominated by headwinds and tailwinds. And it may be Debbie Irving's terminology, but you really use it to great effect in this book to help people appreciate what it means to be pushed by a tailwind and what it means to confront the resistance of headwind. Can you talk about that, please?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It is Debbie Irving's metaphor of headwinds and tailwinds. And to just first describe how the metaphor lives in my thinking, and I'm hoping my kids aren't listening because they're going to crack up if they hear this example. But imagine I went out for a run, and Wanda, why are you laughing? So I go out for a run, right? And I'm cranking. I'm really like, ooh, I ate my Wheaties. This is like, look at me go. I'm feeling pretty good, right? And I'm like, my goal is to get to that corner, and then I'm going to turn around, U-turn, and it'll be an out and back run. And as I head back, I'm not quite feeling it like with the same momentum. I'm struggling a little more. And it's what before felt like it was effortless is now coming with great difficulty. And if a neighbor from a window is just looking, they're not outside, they're just watching me, they're seeing someone who's not even trying, or doesn't have much persistence, or must come from a community that doesn't really value running, because look, she's actually walking now. I don't even think she's running anymore. And in fact, what we know, of course, is that on my way to the corner, I had the tailwind working in my favor. We also know that when we fly from one coast to another in one direction, we save like half an hour because of a tailwind. And then when I'm coming back, I have that headwind that's slowing me down. Those winds are invisible to others, and sometimes even invisible to us. I might not even realize why I'm going slower, why it is more effortful, why the person who just ran by me in the opposite direction doesn't even seem to be sweating, and yet I'm barely keeping up. I might internalize that there's something wrong with me, in fact, in that moment. And so that metaphor of headwinds and tailwinds has been helpful to me in understanding what's meant when people use the word systemic. I went searching for an understanding of that word because I was about a third of the way through the writing of my book. And I interviewed about 40 people for the book, including, I was so grateful that Julie mentioned Joe McNeil. My husband and I actually visited with Joe and his wife, Ina, yesterday. We had a safe outdoor masked catch up with them. And he remains principled and humble, and we had good laughs, and he remains, just as Julie described, committed to being better every day. It's tremendous. The stories that I was gathering through these interviews, the word systemic kept coming up. And I like, I know what the word means, but I didn't really understand why everybody kept bringing it up in my book about unconscious bias. Like, why does everybody keep talking? That's not what my book's about. And so then I kind of went in search of, let me try to understand why everybody keeps bringing this up. And boom, I was so embarrassed to realize what wasn't obvious to me, that as a social psychologist, I'm trained to think about individuals or maybe small groups. And I was missing the very obvious insight that individuals and small groups sit in a society, and that societies have institutions and structures and systems. And so Headwinds and Tailwinds was my entry point to understanding that and the invisibility of them. I actually had to go back to HarperCollins and renegotiate my table of contents to include that chapter, because when we looked at my 60-page book proposal, the word systemic, I did a search in Microsoft Word. It literally didn't appear, the word systemic. And I was proposing we add a whole chapter about it. And what's interesting, Julie, about that chapter is that it's the chapter I get the most reader response on. And I think it's because it's the chapter that took me the most. I had to write it for myself to understand it. I had to walk myself through what are the headwinds and tailwinds. And in that chapter, we do kind of a side-by-side comparison of someone named Colleen, and what if her grandfather had been a Black World War II veteran versus a white World War II veteran, and how does Colleen in 2018 live different lives as a result? And that was meant to illustrate how the headwinds and tailwinds show up.
I interact with authors on the page. I write in books, and when I got to that part of your example about Colleen, I was just, this is the kind of writing I do in books, like that kind of, and I was like, yes, because the GI example, when people are like, why do they keep complaining about slavery? Why can't they just, right? This is kind of the narrative of those who say people who are Black and brown are not working hard enough, complaining too much. And if we just behaved right, we wouldn't get killed by police. And I usually point to the GI Bill. I do this sort of hop, skip, and a jump. It's like, okay, slavery, boom, Reconstruction, KKK, Jim Crow, Black Wall Street, World War II. And let's talk about what Black GIs did not have access to when they came back from fighting off Hitler and company. They didn't have access to education in the same way. They didn't have access to housing loans, and they didn't have access to neighborhoods. And so therefore they weren't able to pass that wealth of, the biggest source of net worth for the typical family is the amount of money you have in your home. And we leave that to our children when we die. And that's how our children, can kind of benefit from whatever lives we led financially. So I just was cheering for you on the page, like, yes. Thank you for mentioning that. Such an important example.
And Julie, can I ask you a question? I did not know about the GI Bill being for white veterans, not Black veterans, until I was writing this book, meaning like it was sometime in 2017. I'm curious when you learned about it, or if you remember when you learned that.
I love that you're saying this, because I think one of the hardest things about 2020, which has been a hell of a year, has been discovering how many people don't know a lot about African-American history.
Yeah.
I happened to study, I was an American Studies major at Stanford, and I went to law school to try to be one of the, many millions of people who would use law to try to undo some of these wrongs and redress some of these inequities and so on. So I believe I studied it back in the 80s. In a civil rights and civil liberties class taught by Jim Steyer, who many of us know here, founder of Common Sense Media. That his class freshman year was my first introduction to American history through a critical race lens. And and I'm glad you're telling the story. It's a simple one. It's one people can wrap their arms around, because so many people alive today have someone in their family, a grandparent, a great-grandparent who fought in World War II. So there's a personal connection. And Levittown, the suburbs you describe as having been built with the prosperity of the 1950s, coming out of the GI Bill, Levittown, et cetera, were built. And Levittown and its ilk explicitly said these homes may not be sold to Black people, or must only be sold to Caucasian people. You
Yes.
know, this is not ancient history. This is America depicted in sitcoms that we can still watch reruns of on, you know, Netflix, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me move on. I want to go to two different places. It's going to be two different questions, but I just want to tee up the second one so you don't get it in the first. The first is how white people can respond, how some white people will respond to the self-threat they feel when whiteness is raised, when the tailwind of whiteness, because now let's name it, like we're talking about tailwinds, we're talking about privileges that just come like the wind at your back that you can't even see, but boy, does it have an impact. So you talk about how some white folks respond to the self-threat about whiteness, you call it. There are three things. The next question is going to be on the 4 good intentions. So let's hold off on that in case that would come in response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think you're referring to the research by Miguel Unzueta and Brian Lowry about deny, dismantle, or distance. Is that what you're, yeah. So it's really interesting research they've done. This is Brian Lowry's at Stanford and Miguel Unzueta's at UCLA. And their research shows these 3 typical responses to the naming of whiteness. Deny is to like, it's what it sounds like, that the privileges of whiteness are dismissed and not accepted as factual despite immense data suggesting they exist. Deny. Distance is that one kind of makes oneself not tied to the white identity, that one kind of like not all white people, like not, in other words, not me kind of response would be the distance response. And then the dismantle response is the desired response. It's the one where we're actually actively trying to dismantle those systems. And so in whatever way, dismantle sounds like a very overwhelming term, but dismantle can happen in all sorts of daily micro ways. And so dismantle is, what are we doing? In my nomenclature of my book, it would be being a builder, not a believer, not just believing in equity, but actively trying to build more equitable systems, organizations, and communities.
So one of the ways in which, and I realized, you know what I just realized?
What?
I'm making this all about race, and I want to be super clear, and I'm doing that because I'm a Black and biracial person, and race is top of mind for me and has been for a long time. But Dolly's book, I want you to know, is about being the person you mean to be with respect to your other humans, with respect to your fellow humans. There are myriad ways in which we can be biased against people. Race and skin color are but one. Gender, sexual orientation, perceived gender, religion, socioeconomic class, neurotypicality versus atypicality, mental health challenges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this book is a guide regardless of what the issue is. So I just want to acknowledge, I've really read this with a race lens. I apologize.
No, I totally get that. I think that's where my head was too, but thank you for reminding me what I wrote.
Yeah. Okay. You talk about how there, you know, that when one wants to show up as, let's call it an ally,
Yeah.
for somebody else, you know, a group you're not a part of is being mistreated, or an individual in a group you're not a part of is being mistreated somehow, you can therefore show up as an ally, meaning do something, kind of love in action, use whatever privilege you have in that moment to be of good use. You talk about 4 different ways of being, the 4 good intentions. Yeah. And I wonder if you can break those down for us and maybe give us an example of each.
Yeah, sure. And I may need you to prompt me if I forget one. So these are traps that we all fall into. So this isn't demonizing us. We all at times, just based off of the wiring of our minds, will tend to lean towards these, and we just want to pull ourselves back. So one of them was the like pedestal or typecasting trap, where we this one applies a lot to gender, for example, where we women are special, and women are we want to treat women as special. There's a term, benevolent sexism. where someone might say, well, I don't understand. I'm never mean to women. In fact, I'm the opposite. I'm so, women are so special. That is a trap, because even with my good intention to support women, what I've done is sort of limit the types of behaviors that are acceptable for a woman. She needs to fall into this, like, this mother prototype that isn't aggressive, that isn't ambitious, that isn't threatening to anyone else. So that's what typecasting or the pedestal trap might look like. Another one of them was the savior mode. I think in that one I share a story that still breaks my heart, of a student that I mentored quite closely through his undergrad experience, and a first generation college student who had to deal with a lot of challenges of our institution. I'm a professor at NYU, an institution, as well as things that were going on in his own life. He kept navigating and getting through it. I was able to support him and guide him through a lot of those challenges. And I felt he trusted me, and I felt grateful for that trust. And so I was surprised when I found out accidentally one time that his whole housing situation had fallen apart. And so he was sleeping in the library, like not power napping, but like living in the library. Our library at the time was open 24 hours a day. And my first thought when I heard that is the thought that mortifies me now. It was not care for him or concern for him. It was, I could have fixed that. Why didn't he let me fix that? It was all sitting in this like, that could have been a gold star for me. Like, I could be the hero of that story. I know a lot of people who have like extra couches and extra beds. And it took a while for me to sort of circle around to hold up. There's a reason he didn't tell you. He knows how to reach you. He's very aware of how to reach me, and he's very aware that I could have solved that problem. And maybe that's exactly why he did not reach out to me, to once again make himself the victim that I save in this dire circumstance. So that's where the savior mode kind of shows up, where you're centering yourself over someone else. Julie, I'm gonna start blanking out now.
The other two were sympathy and tolerance.
Yeah. So sympathy, thank you. Sympathy speaks to sort of this contrast between sympathy and empathy, where we're kind of, we're so like, I feel so bad for her. And that's actually like dehumanizing, in the sense that I'm kind of objectifying someone else's situation or pain. Recently, I learned a term which others of you may be familiar with, of like inspiration porn. These like videos that go viral where somebody's in some dire circumstance, maybe it's poverty or a disability, and I'm labeling it a dire circumstance because I'm in my sympathy sort of mode. And you're passing it around because it's in some ways just allowing, you're feeling bad for them, so it sort of allows you to sort of feel good about yourself and sort of your lack of their circumstances. And then tolerance, there's a quote, I think I quote Hari Kondabolu, the fabulous comic, who said, what do you tolerate? You tolerate back pain. Like, what is this idea that I'm going to tolerate my gay colleague at work? Like, what's there to tolerate? Like, there's this notion that the tolerance is what we're looking for, suggests there is something aversive in the individual we're tolerating, and so that's sort of watching out for that mode. And in that chapter, Mel Wymore is the story I tell, and I express my ignorance of transgender men and women and non-gender conforming people, and Mel Wymore was the first person I knowingly interacted with in a substantive way, and who's transgender. And like, through the conversations with Mel, I was able to see all those modes come to life, both in their behavior as well as in mine.
The sympathy one is something I've experienced in a slightly different version of the way you just described it, but you do describe it on the page this way, is sort of the tears that come where the person ends up appearing, they're so distraught
Yeah.
by what you have experienced.
Yes.
So that this is somebody, I as the Black person say, you know, the Nazis are marching with the white supremacists in Charlottesville, and this person cries and it's so terrible and I can't believe it. And there's nothing about like, hey, did you want to check in and see how I've brought this to you because I'm in anguish, you know? I remember writing Real American and sharing with a white friend some of the stories that are in there. It's filled with lots of vignettes just from across my life. And I started telling her some of the stories. She was like, what's in your book? And I said, well, here are some examples. And she just put her head down on the picnic table up at Stanford Sierra Camp where we were on alumni weekend, and she just started to cry and she needed consoling.
From
And
you.
I found myself going like, I can't believe this is actually happening because this is the thing. You know, it's like when someone comes up and starts playing with your hair in the workplace and you're like, have you not read enough articles yet that have asked you not to touch the hair of Black people?
Yeah.
You know, and so I was in this meta moment of like, literally something I will write about in this memoir is happening to me as I talk about writing this memoir. It was very big and very meta.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's oh, sorry.
No, that's such a powerful example, and that the sort of cliche of white tears sort of was no longer a cliche. It was like living in your experience, and it also illustrates for me cookie seeking, which a lot of us find ourselves doing. I know I do, where part of what those tears are doing is I want you to know how much I care and how much I get it, and I want you to tell me you know.
Yes.
So that I can exhale.
Right.
And that cookie seeking, which I talk about in a different part of the book, but I think you help us make the connection with the sympathy mode. They're really related.
So let's go to the final question, and then we'll open it up to everyone here who's got their good questions in the chat. What should we be doing? Right? We've talked about what's bad and you shouldn't don't be a savior and don't make it all about you and need sympathy. And recognize the tailwinds and don't, you know, assume that, don't fail to recognize other people's headwinds. Like what's the answer? One of the beautiful things about this book in the literature more broadly is it tells you what to do.
Yeah.
In addition to showing you the research about why all of this is valid and true. So what should we be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share one thing that actually isn't in the book, but after George Floyd's murder and my inbox was blowing up with people saying, what should I do? I ended up starting a newsletter that in June. And what I wrote about was something called the 10% more rule. And the idea between the 10% more rule is in terms of what should I do, you should do 10% more than you were before. And why 10%? Because the research on goal setting says that we need goals, and that we need goals that are both challenging and attainable. And it's important that they be both, that we find the sort of overlap in the Venn diagram. And if we're new to this work, Julie started us off saying that some of us are new to this conversation, some of us have been having this conversation a long time. Those who are new to the conversation, 10% more means being 10% more mortified. Mortified meaning you're mortified by what you're seeing in yourself or what you're noticing in the world around you. The work here is to keep looking, to not look away, to be attentive, to be reading, to be listening, to be watching, to stop talking. 10% more mortified means stay in the work. If you've been like there, you've read articles, you've hashtagged, you've volunteered, you've donated, but you know, if this was a basketball game, you would sort of be on the bench more than you'd be in the game. This isn't a daily thing for you. Then the 10% more means be 10% more terrified. In other words, take more risks, get in the game, take a hard foul, risk the shot, and be more visible. That ask that question at work, challenge that individual who makes that joke. This is the time to take a few risks. And then if you've been in the game, you've played the whole game, you are so exhausted from playing this game, perhaps by virtue of your identity or by virtue of work you do. It's 10% more, in quotes, satisfied, meaning not satisfied that the work is done or that justice has been found, but satisfied that you don't have to play every second of the game, that the rest of us need to do the work as well. And so this 10% more rule, I think, is meant to keep us from getting overwhelmed and keep the momentum going. And then in terms of what we actually do, I'll offer one more rule, which I think is a good place to start, which is the 20-60-20 rule. And this one is in the book. This is from Susan Annunzio, who was a consultant I worked with in my first career, my MBA career and my business career. I was a consultant. And Susan, when she would work with CEOs on big change efforts, they would say, well, we got to get everybody on board for this new change. We're moving from a transaction-oriented bank to being a relationship-oriented bank or whatever. And we got to get everybody on board. And she'd say, no, we do not have to get everybody on board. We're not even going to try to get everybody on board. What we're going to do is there's 20% of people who are already on board. We are going to empower them and not get in their way. There's 20% of people who are never getting on board. We are going to resist the urge to let them wear us out, because they will wear us out. They are vocally going to resist this. And then there's 60% of people who on this particular issue are just not paying attention on this. So they're like, oh, we were a transaction-oriented bank? Like, I didn't even realize, like, okay, that's not the hill they're gonna die on. And what they're gonna do is follow the norms. And they are the people, because they're not vocal, we are going to forget they're there. And in fact, what I think happened in June, the end of May, June, July, is that 60% is what got mobilized for the first time. This 20 was already there and this 20 was already there, but this 60, somehow their intention got engaged. So what can we do? I would say we can start paying attention to who the 20, the 60, and the 20 are, and really engage with that middle 60. This is, you know, back in the days when we had holiday meals with family members, this is instead of arguing with your uncle who's in that closed 20 and going head to head, and, you know, if you're like me, when you go head to head, your best self does not arise. You are not dazzling anyone with your charm and wit. You are just, instead of going head to head, you say something to make it clear you don't agree and that it's not cool what he just said. You just say, ouch, or wow, or God, you don't look old enough to have that old-fashioned point of view. And then you focus on your cousin who's suddenly so interested in his soup, like who's never been so interested in his soup before, because he's in the middle 60. And he's the one you're actually going to get a chance to get, you know, when you're washing dishes in the kitchen. And to just round that out, what we know from influence researchers and persuasion researchers is that when we're trying to influence someone who's not deeply engaged on an issue, not deeply invested in a point of view, what works best is humanizing the issue rather than intellectualizing it. So rather than data and statistics, we want to go with stories about our roommate or you know, an anecdote about our own personal experience that's more likely to be effective.
Thank you, Dolly. You've actually just anticipated our first question, which was from Chad Dyer. I saw Chad kind of nodding as you responded. But I think Chad is looking for one step further, which might be an example to the point of the cousin or the brother who was eating the soup. So let me just frame Chad's question. I'd love to hear y'all talk about the strategies to prime others to get past the embarrassment and guilt to take on a growth mindset when in dialogue with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Chad. I know Chad and I have spoken once before, so it's nice that you're here. I think the strategy that's most effective is making your own learning visible. And what that means is really, this is where it becomes really important that we see ourselves as goodish, not good. Because if you see yourself as a good person, meaning it's a binary, I'm good or I'm not, it's going to be really hard to share your own mistakes and your own evolution. If you see yourself as goodish, as someone who's always getting better, then you will feel actually very comfortable saying, not very comfortable, you might feel like, but you'll be more willing to say, hey, I once said something that I thought was funny, and someone pulled me aside and told me it wasn't funny at all. And it really, like, I was so embarrassed for weeks. I avoided that person. But now I realize what a gift it was. I hope you know that what I'm about to share with you comes with the same love. I hope you see this as a gift. Then blah, blah, blah. I think it's the making our learning, our own learning visible is the most powerful thing we can do. And actually anything, there's many educators in this Zoom right now. We know as educators, that's very powerful. In almost anything we do, if we can sort of bring forth and show your work, then it becomes more visible and attainable for others.
Thanks, Dolly. We're going to try to get through 3 more questions before time is up. So here we go. A question from Carrie Portis. Do you think a lot of bias is related to power and not wanting to relinquish power if you have it? Realize this is a leading question, smiley face, but really do hope I have a fluid mindset. Do you think a lot of bias is related to power and not wanting to relinquish power if you have it?
Yeah, so yes and no. I mean, there's actually a really robust amount of research on power. In fact, some of the best power researchers are at NYU, my institution, and at Stanford, institution in your backyard. The thing that's really interesting about power, and this doesn't have to be like power like you have your CEO. It could just be power like I'm the older sibling and I get to decide who sits in the front seat versus the back seat. The power makes us less good at noticing things. We actually, like what the studies show is I literally won't read your nonverbals as well when you prime me to think of myself as powerful versus if you would prime the same person to not think of themselves as powerful, I would do a better job sort of noting the behaviors of the people around me. So I think the noticing skills are really critically important to doing this kind of work. And power, absolutely. I'm sure there's other ways, but I think the less obvious way is how power makes us less good at seeing what's happening around us. And I have a Forbes piece. I can't remember what it's called, but I used to write an online column for Forbes, and there is a piece somewhere in there that I could probably dig out that talks about, it's power blind spots. I'm pretty sure that's what it was called, something about power blind spots, if someone wants to read more about that.
Awesome. This question came in privately, so I don't know the name of the person asking, but I'm glad they asked it. During our current time, when so many people are perceiving their own physical and material scarcity and seem willingly ignorant of the persistent impact on their and others' lives of race and isms that grow out of other cultural identities, how do we continue to recruit good people into the personal and social activism of becoming good-ish when it often requires such psychological dislocation of so much that they believed or thought they knew?
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically right now, not everyone's in a place or space to engage in thinking beyond their immediate needs. I think that's real, and we would all want to honor that. There are, I think, many of us who are actually searching, though, for something to do and something to contribute to. And so what I would say is this is a little bit 20-60-20, but in a different way. Like let's focus on those who have the capacity and are looking for purpose right now.
Got you.
I'm trying to do shorter answers.
Here's a question from Lily Raimundos. Lily says, I am challenging the notion that the listener to a story or the recipient of another's experience has to have a script of reaction. Perhaps in transition, the discomfort becomes visible through the expression of emotion. I do understand that I am placing the responsibility on the storyteller to teach the listener.
So I guess what was the script?
Yeah,
I didn't understand that.
Well, Lily, I'm going to try to clarify. Then if Lily wants to clarify further, we can. I'm reading this as you and I talked about how it was frustrating when the sympathy response ends up being the tears of the listener. And Lily's saying that that's basically requiring that listeners, I'm about to sneeze. Excuse me.
Bless you. Bless you. Bless you.
That listeners have a certain script, like you can only respond, listen this way. So Lily's saying, I'm challenging the notion that the listener has to basically, you know, have a certain response. Maybe in transition in this work, the discomfort they have becomes visible through the expression of emotion. And isn't that valid? I think that's what Lily's saying.
Yeah, no, and of course we want authentic responses. I guess though I think it's a matter of understanding the impact that's having. And my guess is that it's not a script as much as I suspect that when we do that, when I'm cookie seeking, I probably don't realize the impact it's having on others. I write in the book about Rachel Herniak, a former student of mine, why is everybody in the Bay Area? She also lives out there. A former student of mine, and a story she tells of after the Orlando Pulse shooting, how she didn't want to go to work the next morning. She identifies as queer, and she worked at a very progressive company at the time. So it wasn't like there was going to be any support for the shooting or anything, but she felt like she was going to be taking care of everyone else when she herself was grieving, very similar to what you described, Julie. My suspicion is her colleagues didn't realize that's the impact they were going to be having on her. So I don't think the proposal is that for a script, and I'm sorry if it came across that way. I think the proposal is to understand the impact it's having, the unintended impact it's having on others.
I'm going to try to offer a brief story in response as well. I have a white mother and a Black father who's long since passed away, as with Kelly's dad. My white mother is in my life here in Palo Alto. She's 81. She is in an attached cottage. We're in the main house and she's attached. And the neo-Nazis and white supremacists, when they marched in Charlottesville, that happened on a Friday night, I believe. And so Saturday morning, I awakened to a New York Times alert about this thing. And I felt fear like I had not felt since I was a small child seeing the KKK on the television for the first time. And yet I was, I think, 50. And so I was a bit embarrassed for feeling fear, but I really did feel fear. Like the KKK is marching unhooded, terrified me. So I saw my mother outside gardening, and I went to basically to get a hug, but I couldn't ask for that because that's the dynamic. So I said, hey, Mom, did you hear the news? And for my mom, it's only news if Lester Holt said it on TV or the New York Times printed it. And of course, the news wasn't yet in her news. She wouldn't hear about it until Saturday night news. So I told her what happened. And she said, oh my gosh, that is terrible. And she went, Trump and Paul Manafort. And she started going into her narrative about politics. And I nodded and I said, yeah, I'm just, it's terrifying. And she says, it is. And I said, I'm scared. She says, so am I. We're all scared. And then she went off again. And I was standing there trying not to cry in the presence of my own mother, who did not discern that what I needed was to be listened to. I was saying in all kinds of ways, and this is someone who knows me, obviously, right? I'm terrified. I'm hurting, right? And she made it, she went off into what she believes about politics and white supremacists. And finally I said, could I have a hug? And she said, oh, of course. And she came toward me and hugged me. And she said, I said, this is so hard for me. And she said, I know, it's so hard for all of us. And I pushed her back and I said, with all due respect, Mom, they do not have a target on your back. Even the most well-meaning white person. I am so much more than a well-meaning white person, she yelled at me. I persisted. I said, Mom, and then she went on to say how she'd married my father and she'd given birth to me. Can you see how she had taken this information that I was bringing about the white supremacists and the Nazis and the KKK and made it all about her? Here was her Black child expressing fear That's what she couldn't see. So I said, Mom, the Nazis and white supremacists and KKK don't know you married daddy. When you walk down the street, they don't see that you married a black man. Okay? You know who they do see? Your grandson. That's who they see. Okay? So if we could just pull this back here for a moment to what I'm trying to say, which is I am scared out of my fucking mind. And could I have a hug? Could you please try to see me in my experience? Ask me about my experience. Listen to what I'm sharing about my reality. I said, if you can do that for about 45 seconds, I will then be able to listen to whatever it is you need to say. That's, I think, what we're asking for. And that is why we will insist that if you choose to get very upset about your own stuff, as the person with more skin in the game, often literally, is in crisis, in experiencing trauma, we are asking that you set yourself to the side for a moment and make it about understanding what the person who's telling the story is trying to express.
Julie, what a gift, what you just shared. Thank you.
I'm trying to share with you, I'm doing the work. My mother's trying to do the work. I am not myself perfect. Please don't take that out of this. I am constantly doing the work to undo the implicit biases in my own brain and heart toward all kinds of people. And my mindfulness practice has allowed me to notice when stereotypes are coming and to interrogate that. Oh, you're about to stereotype someone, Julie. How about you treat them like they're your best friend? And then a smile fills my face and I can just interact with a person with kindness and dignity, which is what we all want, all of us. Dolly, we are out of time. It is your bedtime. Go have your nightcap or your chamomile tea or put on your little bonnet for nighttime or whatever you do. You know, thank you for joining us here on the best coast, West Coast, no offense. We can still be biased when it comes to the coasts, right?
I guess, whatever.
I'm joking. You know what? Some of my best friends live on the East Coast.
There you go.
And on that note,
Turn it
everyone.
back over to Katie and Kelly, yes.
Oh, and everyone on that note, please join us in thanking Dolly and Julie for such a powerful, inspiring conversation that has given us so much to talk about at breakfast, at dinner, at lunch, to write people about and to share this recording, to go buy The Person You Mean to Be, and to go also pre-order It's Your Turn. Your Turn.
Your Turn. And Julie's memoir, which
Real
is
American.
a must read. A
Yes.
must read. You
Yes.
have to wait till April for her next book, but
Yes.
read her first two now.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, y'all.
We wish you back to your wonderful family, Dolly, who I've gotten to hear a little bit more about. And I know people, if you want to share things, CPS Lectures, hashtag CPS Lectures. Dolly is one hashtag tonight. Hashtag CPS Lectures is another one. And we just, you know, I can tell from all of the chat coming in, Dolly, how much you have moved everyone, and you as well, Julie. And thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us from all over the place, and please share this when we send you the link.
Thank you, everybody.